I'll be reading Mark 1, verses 29 through 39 from the New International Version. As soon as they left the synagogue, they went with James and John to the home of Simon and Andrew. Simon's mother-in-law was in bed with a fever, and they immediately told Jesus about her. So he went to her, took her hand, and helped her up. The fever left her, and she began to wait on them. That evening, after sunset, the people brought to Jesus all the sick and demon-possessed. The whole town gathered at the door, and Jesus healed many who had various diseases. He also drove out many demons, but he would not let the demons speak, because they knew who he was. Very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went off to a solitary place where he prayed. Simon and his companions went to look for him, and when they found him, they exclaimed, "Everyone is looking for you." Jesus replied, "Let us go somewhere else, to the nearby villages, so I can preach there also. That is why I have come." So he traveled throughout Galilee, preaching in their synagogues and driving out demons.
Derek and I just visited a moment across the pew saying how perfect those choir selections were for this morning. And will, if you like, please join me in a prayer of gratitude to God. Yay, God. And thank you, choir. What do you do that is just for you? The older I get, the more I understand that these things, whatever they are, that I do just for me, don't need to be elaborate or expensive, and they don't even need to take very much time. So I wonder, what do you do that's just for you to feed your spirit? Do you have a favorite mug you drink coffee from? A favorite place you like to sit in your home? Do you like to exercise for you, or read, or quilt, or hunt, or watch a favorite TV show? On my way home from our leadership retreat here at the church yesterday, the sun started to shine again, and it's shining this morning. And a theme I heard again and again at the leadership retreat is how many of us meet God and take time just for us by enjoying nature in some way. And what a glorious thing it is to have the sun shining in the sanctuary this morning, illuminating Jim this morning. Sometimes it's Jelaine. The sun moves. Isn't that wonderful? Or we move. The things that we do just for us can change throughout the human lifespan. And some of these things, if you reflect on your life and what you have enjoyed doing since you were a kid, some of these things remain the same through a person's whole lifespan. Isn't that a marvel? When I was younger, I had a lot of free time to spend outside, and I loved to climb trees and go for bike rides on the country roads. When I was living in my own home for the first time, it happened to be owned by Larry and Carol Temple in North Newton. In that tiny house with my husband, just married, opening a can of starfish shrimp with a new can opener was enough to do just for fun. That felt just for me. Once I became a mother, just for me time felt a little more scarce, and I learned to enjoy the silence and serenity of nursing a baby while reading a book, because there wasn't a lot of free time other than that. And now, many years later, I like to sit with this cup with about 3/4 full of coffee and a bunch of whole milk, and I like to take my phone and put my feet up and solve the New York Times Wordle puzzle, not the crossword puzzle, before I do anything else in the day. Maybe some of you can relate to these little practices. I'm so curious to know what it is that you do just for you. Whatever it is, whatever those ranges of things are, I hope they give you a little jolt of joy. Contemporary psychology tells us that doing these kinds of things that bring us little jolts of joy, that bring us happiness, that they contribute to what is called eudaimonia, which literally means, from Greek, good spirit. Eudaimonia. The more practical application of that word eudaimonia is well-being. So the little things we do just for us contribute to our well-being, especially when we consciously enjoy those things. We don't just do them reflexively without thinking about them. We pause to say, I'm drinking my coffee. And then we say, I solved the puzzle, or I see the sun, or wow, doesn't it feel good? I just took a breath. So it is adding our conscious enjoyment to this thing we do just for us that creates that eudaimonia, that feeling of well-being and happiness. In our story today, we are invited to look beyond all the reflexive things we might tell ourselves about well-being and how we should do things, how we should work, how we should enjoy ourselves, how we should rest. We are invited to look beyond that, to consider the heart of Jesus, the actions of Jesus, and what Jesus has to say to us about our well-being and how we can cultivate well-being the same way Jesus does. Today's story takes place on the Jewish Sabbath, and Jesus has just returned from the local Capernaum synagogue. On Wednesday evening, we heard a story from Luke, probably about this same synagogue, although when I tried to make those stories match up, they didn't quite. But Jesus has just returned from the local synagogue, and he has been there casting out demons and astonishing people with his authority. The way he carries and uses his gifts in the world. At the end of the Sabbath day now, he's returning to the home with his friends, his new friends and followers, Simon, James, Andrew, and John, to the home of Simon's mother-in-law, who lives there in Capernaum. And she's ill, she's sick. And so, continuing to heal on the Sabbath, Jesus heals her immediately, and I try not to see this as just a reinforcement of patriarchal values. Yes, it's true that Simon's mother-in-law gets up and feeds them, but you know what she's doing there? She's doing it as a healed follower of Jesus. So now, not only Simon and James and John and Andrew and all these people who have been healed at the synagogue are becoming followers of Jesus, this woman, Simon's mother-in-law, whose name we don't know, has become a follower too, just like Jesus' mother Mary. So another disciple is made in that healing. As the sun begins to set, as the Sabbath draws to a close, people start to stream to the door of Simon's mother-in-law's house. The crowd clamors at this house. Now that the Sabbath is over, they can get out of their Sabbath practices that they do for God and for their community and for themselves, and they can come and ask Jesus for what they need. They can come and ask for their healing. And it's a chaotic scene. And here too, demons are present, but they are silenced because of the grounded, secure presence of Jesus. You could say, and it's interesting that these words have the same root. The New Testament word for demon, daimon or daimonia, is the same root as that word eudaimonia. So it's an unclean spirit versus a healed spirit. So people who are coming to this house, to this door, crowding and creating chaos, they see Jesus' well-being. They see this house where the people are invited into wholeness. And in the presence of that well-being and wholeness and Jesus' groundedness in his spirit, demons may not speak. What is unwell is invited into wholeness and healing because of God. Because of God's activity and presence and evidence in the person of Jesus and those surrounding him. You could say that the people who come are being shepherded by Jesus beyond their fears, beyond their wants, from death into life, as we will sing in a few minutes. So, because I know that it's true for me as I think about all the people who have been healing presences in my life, whether they are still here on earth with me or not, I have to believe that this healing presence that is so evident in this story in Mark, and that I can see and testify to in my own life as I think about people who have, for example, encouraged me to do the things that are good for me, that ground me. And as I bet you can think about, if you pause for even 10 seconds, as we've done here, and I know you've done many times in the past, just remembering people who have represented Jesus' healing power for you, Jesus' love for you. If we pause to think about those things, we can realize that it's at the heart of God's desire for us. And then we look further into the story to past the conclusion of the healing time, and we can imagine that Jesus and his friends go to sleep, do whatever they do at the end of the day, and then we come to this really essential part of the story that I actually got a little ahead of myself, that I associate this question: what do you do just for you? Who helps you to anchor yourself in the things that you do just for you? Jesus models this for us by getting up before the sunrise, which we can imagine is sometime before 7:30, right? So maybe he's not even getting up particularly early. No, I don't know what the latitude of Capernaum is, so I shouldn't speculate on these things. But Jesus is getting up before the sun rises to remember his authority and identity come from God. He's getting up to pray. He's getting up to be alone, to breathe. And the disciples find him, and they come to him, and it seems that Jesus, in anchoring himself in this time apart, has developed a vision for how he wants to live into the next moments. He could go back to Simon's mother-in-law's house. He could go back and keep at the work of healing and inviting people into healing there in Capernaum. But he tells Simon and Andrew and James and John, no, we've got to move on. So from this time apart, just for him, just with God, Jesus discerns what is next, where God is inviting him and his followers to go next in order to bring more of that eudaimonia, more of that healing presence, more of that well-being. I love Jesus' example here. And we don't just find it in this story in the Gospel of Mark. We find it throughout the Gospels again and again, Jesus going away to the deserted place. I love this example for us of what can bring healing. And I find it so significant that in this story and in so many stories, the healing moves in kind of a pattern from 1 to 2 to 3, this phenomenon of taking time just for you and then inviting others into that space you have created, and then others are drawn to that and that healing presence, and then going away again and being met by others and then going out again. And in this story, we have kind of the essence of the gospel and this pattern of healing that God creates with us as we take time just for us, as we follow the example of Jesus and seek the heart of Jesus. You could even say that this kind of practice for seeking personal healing is the practice for how we can create community well-being. So as you think on these things and as you ponder this story today, I'd like to invite you to take some questions with you about how you might not only continue your practices of doing things just for you, but how you might think about this creating well-being and happiness and a good spirit in the world around you, as I know you're already doing, but how you might continue this pattern of seeking community healing. So here are some questions I invite you to ponder as you go. What advantages do I have that I can share with others? Do I enjoy U.S. citizenship? Do I have a job? Do I have a home? Do I have some financial resources? Okay, if you can check those boxes, then how do you plan to share those things, those advantages this week? Because healing is always personal, even if we're talking about community healing, you might ask yourself, what are things that put me at risk? Am I subject to loneliness? And how can I address my loneliness this week? How can I reach out to be with others? Am I subject to overwhelm? Okay, how am I going to create extra time just for me this week? Am I in some way experiencing physical health difficulties or mental health difficulties? How can I continue to care for these things if they are long-term, or how can I get help for them this week? What might I do to step toward that help? And then finally, what is a way that I can be generous this week? So as you consider what advantages you have and what obstacles you face, what are some ways that you can exercise generosity? And we'll say 3 ways: toward yourself, in your home, or among those you are closest to. And how can you be generosity in your community this week? These are ways that we can experience the healing and the wholeness and the eudaimonia, the good spirit that Jesus offers us as his followers, both in this story and in our lives.